As soon as I entered that hotel suite, the atmosphere felt dense, suffocating, and charged with a clarity that only betrayal could bring. My gaze landed on Isabella, my wife. Her arms entwined around another man's neck, their laughter cutting through the room like a sharp blade. But surprisingly, I didn't feel anger or heartbreak. Not at first. What I felt was an unsettling calm, a chilling clarity that sliced through my disbelief. They hadn't noticed me standing there, which turned out to be their first mistake. They thought they were clever, but I had known all along. Their secrets were no longer hidden, and I was already engaged in a much larger, far more dangerous game, one they could not win. From the outside, our life appeared flawless. Isabella was a celebrated architect whose designs were featured in top-tier magazines. People admired her, constantly showering her with praise at galas and events. We were dubbed a power couple, her creative brilliance paired with my strategic acumen. I was Gabriel Moretti, a top financial strategist whose influence stretched from boardrooms to the most exclusive clubs in Madrid. Together, we were unstoppable, a perfect duo, living a fairy tale life. But fairy tales always have their shadows, and ours had been quietly festering for a long time. At first, the signs were subtle. A missed dinner here, a vague excuse there. She started coming home late, her explanations always polished and convincing. Late client meetings, deadlines that drained her. She would sigh, slipping off her heels as though the weight of her success exhausted her. A faint trace of unfamiliar perfume would linger on her clothes, but I convinced myself it meant nothing. Her world was glamorous, surrounded by people vying for her attention. So surely that explained everything. But those minor excuses soon turned into recurring patterns. Late nights became weekend absences, and the intimate moments we once shared evaporated, replaced by an ever-growing distance. The breaking point came at a charity auction. Isabella stood beside me, breathtaking in an emerald gown that drew every eye in the room. She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. She was there, but seemed miles away. Her phone buzzed quietly on the table, and I saw her glance at the screen. A flicker of unease crossed her face before she quickly turned away. A name flashed briefly. Raphael. That moment was when the first crack appeared in the illusion of our life. I didn't confront her then, but that name planted a seed of doubt that refused to be ignored. That night, as she slept soundly beside me, her breathing steady and serene, I lay wide awake, my mind racing. The name Raphael gnawed at me until I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and made my way to the living room, where her phone lay charging. My hands trembled as I picked it up, the screen glowing softly in the darkness. The messages were locked behind a passcode, but her email wasn't. I scrolled through a flood of work-related emails until I found it. A message marked confidential from Raphael. The words burned into my mind. Last night was unforgettable. I can still feel your warmth. Same time next week? Anger surged through me, but I didn't act on it. Not yet. I returned to bed, my resolve hardening as I lay beside her. She had no idea I knew, and that would be her first mistake. The next morning, she kissed me goodbye, her smile sweet and casual, as though nothing had changed. As she walked out the door, I made my decision. I would unravel her lies, piece by piece. Over the next few days, I became consumed by the need for answers. I dug through her credit card statements, uncovering receipts for dinners at unfamiliar restaurants, luxurious meals for two in dimly lit, intimate settings. Her calendar revealed meetings that always coincided with her late nights, each one neatly explained away as work-related. Then there was a hotel in Valencia, a luxury retreat where she had checked in twice under her name, but with Rafael Morales listed as her guest. The picture of betrayal became clearer with every new discovery, each piece making the truth sharper, more undeniable. The illusion of our flawless life fractured with every detail I uncovered. I wasn't just a betrayed husband. I was a man on a mission. Beneath the surface, My anger simmered, controlled and focused as I planned my next move. Confronting her outright would have been too simple, too predictable. No, I wanted her to fully grasp the weight of her actions, to understand that betrayal has its consequences. Every step she took, I followed, quietly observing as she moved through her days as if nothing had changed. She thought she had outsmarted me, believed she could juggle her double life without facing the fallout, but I had already set the wheels in motion. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, not just for the lies she had told, but for the years of trust she had so carelessly shattered. Isabella and Raphael had no idea what was coming. They didn't realize that the man they underestimated would be the one to expose their betrayal for what it truly was, a fragile illusion that would crumble under the weight of the truth. Betrayal doesn't make an entrance with grand gestures. It seeps into the cracks of a relationship, silent and unseen, until the moment it all collapses. And when it does, the ones who cause it rarely recognize the storm they've unleashed. But this time, the storm would have a name, and they would remember it. It was the smallest details that cut the deepest, the sheer audacity of her actions, the intricate web of lies she wove into the fabric of our life, assuming I would never spot the fraying edges. But I noticed everything I always had. It started innocently, or so I convinced myself, late nights at work, business trips that seemed to multiply, and her constant insistence that everything she did was for us, for our future. Yet there was something in her tone, a slight hesitation, a falter in her voice, that unsettled me. My instincts whispered that something wasn't right, and I chose to listen. I began watching her more carefully, always keeping my distance. Each evening when she claimed to be working late, I followed at a safe distance. It didn't take long before the pattern became clear. She always ended up at the same place, the Valencia, a sleek, upscale hotel known for its discretion. She was cautious, constantly scanning her surroundings, but not cautious enough. One night, I saw him for the first time, Raphael. He greeted her outside the hotel, his arms sliding around her waist in a way that was far too familiar, too intimate. She leaned into him, her smile warm, unguarded, a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. The confirmation hit me like a punch to the gut, but strangely, I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger would have been too easy, too impulsive. Instead, I felt a cold, calculated clarity. If I was going to expose this betrayal, it had to be methodical. I spent the next week gathering evidence. Hotel reservations, emails, receipts. Each piece of proof adding weight to the coffin of her deceit. I tracked their movements, studied their routines, and carefully laid out my next steps. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A week later, I invited Isabella to dinner at home. I prepared her favorite dish, paella with saffron and fresh seafood, paired with an expensive vintage Rioja. She arrived late as usual, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly tousled, a look that once would have enchanted me, but now only confirmed my suspicions. "Long day?" I asked, my tone even as I poured her a glass of wine. She nodded, her practiced smile in place. "Exhausting, but worth it. We landed the contract," she said. "Did you?" I replied, setting my glass down and meeting her gaze. "Or did Raphael land something else tonight?" Her smile faltered, and for a split second, panic flickered across her face. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice wavering. I leaned back, taking my time, letting the silence stretch before pulling out the stack of evidence I had painstakingly gathered. I placed it on the table between us, watching her face as she registered what it was: printouts of hotel bookings, credit card charges, screenshots of their emails. "Care to explain this?" I asked. My voice low but steady, her hands shook as she reached for the papers. "Gabriel, it's not," she began, but I interrupted her, my patience finally slipping. "Don't insult me by saying it's not what it looks like," I snapped, my calm demeanor cracking. "It's exactly what it looks like. You've been sneaking around with Raphael, lying to my face and destroying everything we built. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing, not sorrow, not pity, just a cold sense of satisfaction as I watched her web of lies begin to unravel. "Gabriel, I made a mistake," she whispered. "I didn't mean to—" "Stop," I cut her off sharply. "This isn't the time for apologies. This is the time for consequences." My plan had already been set into motion. The following day, I booked the same suite at the Valencia where they had always met. It felt almost poetic to use the very place of their betrayal as the stage for their undoing. I didn't tell Isabella about the arrangement. Instead, I called Raphael directly, using a burner phone and an alias, posing as an interested investor. I suggested a meeting at the Valencia in the suite they frequented. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early and prepared everything: photos, emails, receipts, even a recording of Isabella's tearful confession from our confrontation. When Raphael walked in, he exuded his usual arrogance, pouring himself a drink as if the suite were his. Moments later, Isabella entered, her face pale and panicked. When she saw me standing in the corner, her expression froze in horror. "Gabriel," she stammered. "What are you?" "Please sit down," I interrupted, my voice calm but authoritative. Raphael's expression faltered as he glanced between us. "What is this?" he demanded, his tone sharp. "This," I said, placing the stack of evidence on the coffee table, "is the end of your little game." I turned to Raphael. "Nice ring, by the way," I said, nodding toward the gold band on his finger. "Looks like you're just as deceitful as my wife." His jaw clenched. "You don't scare me," he spat. "You should be scared," I replied, my voice low, "because what comes next will destroy you." I placed a USB drive on the table. "This contains everything: emails, receipts, photos, enough to ruin you, both professionally and personally. I wonder how Sophia will react when she sees it." Raphael's bravado faltered at the mention of his wife. I turned to Isabella, my gaze cold. "And as for you, the moment this goes public, your career, your reputation, it'll be over. You'll become nothing more than a cautionary tale." The room fell silent as the weight of my words settled over them. They realized the game was over. But for me, it had just begun. I sent the USB drive to Sophia, Raphael's wife, anonymously. I imagine her opening the package in their pristine living room, the perfect facade of their life shattering in an instant. But I didn't stop there. Using the evidence I had collected, I leaked damning information about Raphael's business practices to his top competitors, proof of shady deals, bribes, and tax evasion. Within days, whispers turned into headlines, and his partners were forced to push him out. As for Isabella, I tipped off her most prominent client about the scandal. The truth alone was enough to sever their ties. She called me one evening, her voice trembling. "Gabriel, everything's falling apart, my projects, my reputation. I don't know what to do." I listened in silence, feeling no empathy. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Betrayal is a game of precision, and I had played it to perfection. Desperation laced her voice, but it stirred nothing within me. Her pleas hung in the air, but my resolve was unshaken. "Actions have consequences, Isabella," I said, my tone as cold as the wind howling outside. "And now, yours are finally catching up to you." A month later, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, a glass of scotch in hand. Below me, the city stretched endlessly, its lights shimmering, starkly contrasting the shadows that had loomed over my life for so long. The faint hum of classical music drifted in the background, a fitting soundtrack for the final chapter of this dark story. The hum of classical music filled the room, the only sound in the otherwise silent space. Isabella was gone. Her belongings, once scattered throughout our home, were now packed into boxes, never to return. Raphael, too, had disappeared from the public eye. The man who had once been a symbol of charm and success was now a shadow of his former self. His career lay in ruins, his reputation irreparably damaged. Sophia, his wife, had filed for divorce, taking their children and moving to Lisbon to escape the wreckage he had caused. While their downfalls were satisfying, they didn't bring me the deepest satisfaction. What truly filled me with a cold sense of victory was the control I had regained. They had attempted to strip me of everything, my dignity, my trust, my very identity. But in their failure, I had reclaimed more than they had ever taken. I had rebuilt myself into someone stronger, sharper, and unyielding. The night air bit into my skin as I leaned against the balcony railing, gazing at the busy streets below. Betrayal, I realized, was a brutal teacher. It strips away the comforting illusions we hold on to, leaving only the stark truth in its wake. And the truth was this: I was no longer the person they had believed they could manipulate. The fire I had been forged in had tempered me, and now I stood invulnerable. I took the last sip of my scotch, savoring the warmth that spread through me. Then I whispered into the stillness of the night, "Sometimes the storm doesn't break you. It makes you stronger." Months went by, and life slowly returned to a new normal. The chaos that betrayal had wrought in my life gave way to a quiet confidence I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't that I had learned to trust others again. It was that I had learned to trust myself. I knew now that I could weather life's storms without losing my sense of self. One serene afternoon, as I wandered through a small gallery near the Prado Museum, a painting caught my eye. It seemed to radiate both sorrow and beauty, and I found myself drawn to it. As I stood there, captivated by the artist's vision, a voice broke through my thoughts. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I turned to find a woman standing beside me, her presence as striking as the painting itself. Her features were refined but not overtly so, and her demeanor was calm and poised. She smiled at me, and her gaze was warm, inviting, as if welcoming me to share in the moment. "More than words can express," I replied, though my gaze lingered on her rather than the artwork. Her name was Elena. She was a photographer, visiting Madrid to showcase her own work. We spent hours wandering the gallery, discussing art, life, and everything in between. She didn't ask about my past, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to guard it. Her openness and kindness were a balm I hadn't realized I needed. As the sun set, painting the sky with gold and crimson, a profound realization struck me. The betrayal I had endured, as painful as it had been, had acted as a cleansing fire. It had burned away everything false, leaving me with a foundation I could now build upon. What I had created from those ashes wasn't just a new life. It was one grounded in truth and strength. To anyone caught in the storm of betrayal, know this: it does not define you. What defines you is how you rise from the ashes. The pain may seem insurmountable, but within it lies the power to rebuild. And what you rebuild can be stronger, purer, and more resilient than you ever thought possible. Thank you for letting me share this story. I hope it serves as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always a path to the light.